So welcome back. My name is Paul, and I have a series of websites and blogs. And one of the subjects I like to cover is ancient civilizations, ancient technology, and so on. And in the series that I've been making about my case for a previous great world civilization, I've been looking at the world timeline, geological events, great catastrophes, and so on. And I'm not going to get into the details of the timeline right now. I thought I'd take a period of time to think about how ancient man, and we're talking about, let's say, since 70,000 BC, which we know are Cro-Magnon, had a big brain, they were smart, they were tall, and they must have been incredibly smart because they survived somehow for a very, very long time against these incredible geological things that happened. And one thing that we sometimes fail to consider, I know generally a lot of us, we go to school, we learn about history so as much as we can. It's kind of boring. You just need to get on with your life. You got things to do. But the truth is that the ancient period of time, going back for many thousands of years, is really, really fascinating, because if you look back at their records and the stuff that they said, it's clear that there was a high degree of intelligence 5, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 years ago, and they had some really, really amazing stories to tell. And it's not just like the kind of stories that, well, we, in our modern times, we make a million stories, movies, of this, or that, and the other thing. We have some kind of story we're telling. But back then, I mean, they had to make their whole livelihood, their whole life for thousands of years based on some observations, whatever they took to be reality. And if it didn't work, then that system would eventually fail. Now, what I'm driving at is that I believe that it's very obvious that very, very long time ago, we had cities, we have buildings, we have things that go back 10,000 years ago. We have some of the great mysteries like Tiwanaku, Machu Picchu, and why were they building there? I mean, just absolutely incredible things. The temples, there's a burial place in China that is just absolutely phenomenal. So clearly there was some incredible genius going on all over the world for a long time. And what modern scholars looking into this, our conception of what could have existed, it's the old thing. Well, we got to have some evidence. What is the evidence? Now, the problem is that because our Earth is a very turbulent place, and, without good records or anything, I mean, we know, whole cities can go get destroyed. We know for a fact that there's cities under the water. They found them out in the coast of India and other parts of the world. Cities, whole cities that are down like 300, 400, 500 feet below the sea level. Now, what I'm getting at again is, what do you constitute like a high civilization? Because today, our history, well, back then, it was back then, and we know better now because look at all the toys we have. We have all these machines, we can do all this stuff. But you know what we do? We don't practice wisdom. I mean, collectively as a culture, our culture worldwide, let's say, collectively, do not practice good stewardship of the earth. Do not practice, a lot of times, healthy life. So what would constitute a golden age, like the Sat Yuga, the Hindus, or when everybody is like, they have food, they have time, there's peace in general, and people can get an education, and they can use their good health, and they can get the full joy of being a human being. The full joy of being a human being is long life, happy life, healthy life, and explore some of the avenues. Now, there are a number of ways, and I'm going to get into this series about how perfectly modern human beings, intelligent beings, 50, 60, 70,000 years ago, granted there were a lot fewer of them, but they survived, and they must have had systems. So What can you do with technology in terms of our body? Our body is actually the greatest miracle of technology ever. We get too caught up in all the machines that we make. We made that technology. Wow. But what about us? What about the human? What about all the other plants and animals? What about all the medicines that come directly from plants and are made worse by our little geniuses here, you know? So if ancient people could catch on to the nature and use some of the forces, and we're going to get into some of that very clearly now, just a real basic thing, fire. Okay, fire was supposedly a gift from the gods. The controlled use of fire, even raw fire, just for cooking, just pure raw fire with wood, is still being used in our modern era in the 21st century to cook their food and for various kinds of heating and so on. Now, that should tell us something, because it's a technology, it's a force, a useful force of nature that human beings harvested or harnessed and are still being used today after I don't know how many tens of thousands of years the so-called modern human been around. So now I'm getting at the technology, first of all, of introspection, meditation, and connecting psychically and mentally and intuitively with other beings and other animals and other plants, and to sense the powers of nature. We forget about that. Yeah, we have them labeled. Oh, gravity's this and this, electricity, though. No, but even though it's bad to personify a force of nature, but yet they're powerful. And they need to be respected, because they're going to outlaw whatever the force is, whatever names you give them. If we don't respect them, that's not a good use of our own system here. So what I'm getting at is I believe that there could have been at least one big civilization. They didn't have plastic. Maybe they were too smart for plastic. They figured, well, maybe they were just incredible about using the natural forces and practicing all kinds of dreams. I mean, they get into states and they could see, and I mean, there's all kinds of evidence of that. And the systems that they use. Now, they were described, and some of them were hidden, and they're still being practiced again today, thousands of years later. They're practiced in Tibet and India and in the mountains around the world and all kinds of places. They're still practicing those old mental techniques. And they may be living very simple lives. So what I'm getting at is in a high age, supposedly enlightened age, people have time to think, to create. Maybe they didn't create the way we think of creating. Well, they get a canvas and they invent paints and they get pigments, and maybe they did something else. Maybe they did stonework. For sure, we know they did all kinds of amazing stuff with stone. They had amazing buildings. I mean, some of these people were so incredible. They learned how to deal with things like ice ages. They built underground. They made mounds with rocks. They heated all the rocks with fire. They kept themselves warm. Somehow they survived because they were brilliant. And we're going to get into some things that they could have used in navigation, celestial timekeeping, the use of the voice, the power of the voice, power of all kinds of sounds and music. So there's a lot of different things that could be used by ancient geniuses to have a civilization. Maybe it was a civilization that was far less populous, is very, very likely. Maybe they had certain city centers, but we know they had trade and so on. So we're going to have to get into some of that in the next segment about the ancient genius and the ancient technology.